Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comrades, compañeros, welcome back to another edition of the Moynihan Report, and an exciting one for me. I use this show sometimes to talk to people outside of the world of politics that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. If you haven't watched the Ari Aster interview, please do. I sat down with him. His new film, Eddington, is terrific. But today is extra special for me as a tremendous comedy nerd. If you are, like me, a comedy nerd, you've been watching things and you see the slug at the end of every episode. Larry Charles, you keep on seeing Larry Charles, and that's Borat, Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Religulous with our mutual pal, Bill Maher, and my favorite, and by the way, one of the most underrated films and underrated things that Larry Charles has done, Masked and Anonymous with Bob Dylan, a terrific film. And I highly recommend it as also a Dylan nut. But Larry also has a book, which I tore through, called Comedy Samurai, 40 Years of Blood, Guts, and Laughter, which is his memoir and a fascinating one. And Larry Charles, who I saw on a podcast recently, say that this book was 1,000 pages when he cut it down. So I was fascinating at 350 pages. Larry, thank you so much for being here.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I also, by the way, you're the first guest I've had who's also a type 1 diabetic. So I'm very happy about that.
There you go.
And I hope that your A1Cs are great.
I hope that's a trend for you.
It's people see the Dexcom and they start emailing.
Right.
Can I start with start at the end in a way, because at the last chapter of this book, you answered a question that I had, and I forgot that I had, that I'd seen the trailer for this Larry David documentary, and I was so excited on HBO, and then poof, it went in, but it was COVID, maybe something happened. But you explained that Larry David shot this documentary with you and then didn't want to do the documentary, which I presume you have a cut of, and hopefully someday we'll see. But why did he pull back from it?
Well, the documentary was finished. It was the trailer you saw came out just a couple of days before it was about to premiere. And he just made a decision, which I think had been building for a while, not for necessarily good reasons, in my opinion, he did not want it to be seen. And I think that because he wasn't straight with me about that earlier in the process, we got to the point where it was actually finished and delivered, ready to be broadcast. The trailers were on, people were seeing the promos in the media. And then in those last couple of days, there was a sudden surge of activity, which eventually led to the show being pulled. So it was a kind of a shocking turn of events. I kind of felt some of his reticence. I tried to walk him through it. I kept him very, cognizant of what was happening. He saw all the cuts. He was very conscious of what this was going to be, and he loved it. By the way, and early in the process, when he saw those first couple of cuts, he was like, "This is the best interview I've ever done. This is fantastic." He showed it to his kids. They loved it. HBO was excited. It did nothing to hurt him in any way. It was not like a warts and all thing. It showed a more intimate version of him, a less funny version, perhaps. And we talked about things like spirituality and death. And, he cried at one point. So it was another side of Larry David. But I think the audience for Larry David, they love him. And this would have expanded that base for him, if anything. So it did catch me by surprise, even though on a certain level in the back of my mind, I was also in denial that this was a possibility. And then it just came on so strong. And Ari Emanuel, his agent, called me, who used to be my agent, and I had done a lot for, but he just called me like I was some sort of like a paparazzi or something, and just screamed at me like I was some horrible person who had done some terrible wrong to Larry. And of course he had it all wrong, completely wrong, but literally screamed at me. So my wife was like in the room. She was like, she could not believe that I was getting screamed, like a grown man was screaming at another grown man like that, like out of control about something he was completely wrong about. And then Larry called me right after to apologize and say how embarrassed he was but I started to realize they've been talking, and I was told that Ari had told HBO that they would not do another season of Curb if this documentary was broadcast. And what was HBO supposed to do at that point? They really needed Curb. They didn't really need this, and that decision was made.
Yeah, I mean, Ari Emanuel comes across like what a sweet guy in your book. It's like, you pull no punches in this. It like reminded me of the Lou Reed live record, "Take No Prisoners." It's just like chaotic, and you're telling the truth. And look, you say he gets upset, he cries. You talk about mortality, and death, and spirituality. I mean, Larry's older than you, but you said in the book that I kind of know Larry better than a lot of people, better than most people. And you've known him since you did Fridays,
Right.
which is what, the early 80s, late 70s, right? Probably 1980s.
Yeah, like 1980.
Yeah, which I kind of carbon dated because you said the Clash were on playing stuff, I think,
Right.
from Sandinista, which is like, that was a really envious moment.
Maybe London Calling.
Oh, maybe London Calling. Yes, that'd be 79. But you've
yeah.
known him for a really, really long time. Yeah. He pulls out of this. You're having these intimate conversations. And the thing that really hit me, like right in the gut when I was reading this, is you quote a text from him and you say, it is February 2022, and that was the last time I ever heard from Larry David. It's 2025. You guys are old guys. I mean, doesn't that make you sad in some way?
Well, I talk about that in the book as well. I mean, I have to say that when you reach a certain age, you inevitably have loss. You lose your parents, people die, friends drift away for a variety of reasons. You have arguments that never get resolved. And, I've had my share of that, really. A lot of the people in the book are people that I don't speak to anymore for one reason or another. So, I have a certain residual sadness about it. But the truth is, he has a life, I have a life, pretty full lives, fortunately, luckily. And I don't feel a lot of remorse. I don't feel a lot of sadness about it. I feel like this is the inevitability of life. And yeah, life is sad. I would say that. Yeah. But this is like one of the things that makes life sad. But I'm not particularly overly overcome with emotion about it, even from the very beginning. When it really first happened, I was kind of shocked, but the sadness or anger also, I didn't really feel much anger about it. I felt like this is the way it works. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you eat the bear, sometimes the bear eats you, kind of a thing. Yeah. And I came to accept it pretty quickly. And I was in the middle of shooting another movie, and I really didn't even have time to process that. And so until I talk about it with people like you in these situations, I don't really think about it that much, honestly.
I mean, I say that mostly because of your lives being so, intertwined and your paths being so parallel with, Fridays and Seinfeld and Curb. And you were there from the very beginning at Seinfeld. You were with the first 3 seasons you wrote on all of those?
Yeah. I did like 80 episodes, the first 80 episodes. I love Larry, and I still love him, and he has done more for me. I think I say in the book too. He's been more influential in my adult life than almost anybody else. Yeah. More than Bob Dylan in a lot of ways. I mean, he really taught me. I met him when I was like 22 years old. I mean, he really taught me how to be a man, how to, operate in this cutthroat business, how to maintain your integrity and not compromise. He taught me a lot of life lessons besides creative lessons. So I owe a lot to him, and I don't forget that. And that part, it really does stick with me. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, I mean, when there's a bit in the book when you talk about Dylan and writing with him on Masked Anonymous. After it, the least surprising sentence in the entire book was, "That was the last time I heard from Bob," which I'm sure is a sentence 40 million people have said. That was because as you pointed out, Bob Dylan does not have friends, so you expect that going in. With Larry, it seems like a longer thing. You obviously are incredibly honest about certain relationships. The one that I think stuck out to me most, and probably to most people, is Sacha Baron Cohen, because you guys together made one of the greatest comedy films of the 20th century, or 21st century, I guess, in Borat, which is an absolute masterpiece and a classic.
Thank you.
But so all of these things that you're honest about, Has there been any backlash? Did you have any reticence about telling, your readers what you actually felt about all these things? 'Cause you read celebrity, Hollywood books, music biographies, people pull punches. You expect them to pull punches. I didn't feel like there were a lot of punches pulled in this book.
There's probably a few, but not too many. I am from Brooklyn. I don't like to pull punches. If you're going to throw a punch, there's no point in pulling it. You should just follow through, And I thought that the way to make it work, I think if it was just me finger pointing and blaming people and saying, terrible things about people, then that might be an issue. But I thought as long as I'm honest about myself as well, and I'm pretty candid about my own failures and failings and issues, I thought that it's a balanced book in that way. And I have a great memory, and the things that I talk about happened. There's nobody that, Ari Emanuel might come off a certain way in the book, but he can't dispute that those things happened. The things I talk about with Sasha, they happen. And by the way, there are witnesses to almost all of those kind of stories, So I felt okay. And also, when you publish a book, as it goes through all this vetting process and everything like that. And I had lawyers ask questions about all kinds of things. But in the end, I was able to kind of show that these things really happen, and that if you need to ever talk to anybody else who was there, they will tell you exactly the same story. And so as long as it's the truth, I think no one can dispute it. They may not be happy about it, but they can't really dispute it. And I'm also very honest to a fault about myself as well.
I've worked in publishing. I've been a journalist for my entire life. And when I'm reading this book, I'm looking at the kind of structure of it and what's in it and what's not in it. You don't talk a lot about your childhood. You leave some breadcrumbs about your relationship with your father, particularly your mother, who you clearly had a better relationship with. But the honesty about your own failings, which I think is actually what makes the book so compelling, and not something that is just a victory lap at look at all the great things that I did.
Right.
You have many kids. You have 4, right? Is it 4 kids?
Well, 5, really.
5 kids, because you have an adult. Yes, you have a stepchild. Did you worry in any way about how they would react to some of the stuff? Because you say, multiple times in the book, you say, I was unfaithful almost serially in my life, which I could maybe admit to on this show, but I won't. but that's not an admission. That was just me hinting at something. But do you worry when you're creating something like this? This is kind of this is what people remember you by, and that's why you produce a memoir. I remember talking to Christopher Hitchens about when he was writing his memoir, and I said, "You're so young. Why are you doing this?" And of course, he died a handful of years later. Right. But it is about guiding history's look at you, and you wanted to put that in, and didn't worry about how people and family would react to it.
Well, 2 things. First of all, as you alluded to at the beginning, the book was originally 1,000 pages, and
it was literally 1,000 pages. Is that true?
Literally 1,000 pages. It's now like 400. So, the first half of the book was about my childhood, a lot of stuff about my parents and growing up in Brooklyn and coming out to LA before I got the job on Fridays. So that, rather than try to cut all that down and kind of make it sort of fit, I decided I would just cut that part of the book and make that a second book. So that will come out at some point, like that whole first part of the story, So I get into a lot of detail about all of that stuff. My childhood is a very surreal Lord of the Flies kind of childhood, and it's entertaining in a very different way than the second half of the book. As far as my kids go, that's a very good point. And my children, particularly my oldest daughter, was a little bit concerned, and I didn't want to go out of my way to hurt people's feelings in that realm. I tell a story in the book about the police coming to my house and looking for this child pornography. And it turned out it was my daughter had taken pictures for an art class. And she has always been extremely, even though she didn't do anything wrong, and she's a grown woman now, and she's a producer on Real Housewives. She was always embarrassed by that. And I said, look, I'm going to tell that story it's going to be fine, but she had some reticence about that. And I think my kids are moving very slowly through the book and having it's almost like my children's book club, like reading a chapter and then discussing it,
Yeah.
So they're processing it, but I didn't know how else to do it. I mean, I didn't feel like I could really tell the story of my life without talking about all these things,
Yeah.
and so I think they'll adjust, as they've had to adjust to me doing a lot of other strange things in my life.
No, I mean, I think it's okay for me to say this story, but Christopher, when his book was in galleys, said that his daughter, who was I think 16 at the time, read a portion that just mentioned her in a very kind of banal way, and she said, "Cut it." And he did, and there's no mention of his kids in the book for that reason. So I was surprised and impressed that you put that in there. But one of the other things that I thought was interesting about this book is that, a guy that you were probably for years confused for, people presumed you were Rick Rubin at times, I think. But you talk about your friendship with Rick Rubin, and it's a strange story because he buys you a phone when you guys meet because you don't have a phone, so you can keep in contact, and you become the best of friends. And it just, at some point, just ends. What was why did you tell that story? And what was the because that happens with a lot of people and a lot of friends, I'm sure. But this one seemed like it was important to you.
Well, we were like, in my view, we were like best friends for a while. We hung out all the time. I mean, yes, he bought me a BlackBerry, and he would buy his friends BlackBerries so that we could all be in touch with each other. So Owen Wilson, Ben Stiller, all these people had BlackBerries, and it was like the early stages of that technology, and people were, writing jokes to each other and all that kind of stuff. And all those relationships, I think, kind of fell apart to some degree. I think with Rick, I caught him. We became friends at a certain point in his life. He was overweight. He wasn't healthy.
Yeah.
We used to do the coolest things together. I mean, he has access to everything. And so we would go see concerts and Lollapalooza and, things like that. And we had a great time. We'd laugh a lot. We wrote together. We really had fun. But he was unhealthy. And at a certain point, he needed to start getting healthy. And that became kind of a focus for him, and I had other things that were starting to kind of accumulate for me as well. And we started to sort of drift apart. I felt like I wasn't getting much out of the relationship after a while. Like I was kind of there for him, but that he wasn't really there for me. And so I think for those kind of natural reasons, it sort of started to drift away.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting... Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, again, it's like the kind of thing where I look back fondly at my time with him because we had a lot of fun, but I don't have like false nostalgia for it.
Yeah.
It's like it was great while it lasted, and then we moved on. And we're both fine, and I think that's part of the reality of life.
Yeah, no, nostalgia can be an incredible poison in people's lives. It's funny when you talk about class a lot in this book. I mean, there's this kind of red thread that it's like this is Larry's Marxist book about class. I mean, even so much that you say that the Hamptons episode of Seinfeld, you're like, guys, this is not things that people ordinarily deal with. And I find that interesting of like coming from Coney Island and coming from Brooklyn, where, by the way, where you grew up, so many great comedians came from. I mean, this is a great spot for like New York Jewish comedy, from Woody Allen to you to Larry David, et cetera. But there is that lack of that disconnect, because you say at the sort of towards the end of the book that, Larry David is living a life of a very rich person. And when you wrote that, I said, well, you're the writer on Seinfeld. You did Borat. You're probably living the life of a rich person too. But those degrees, when you're in Hollywood, mean something, don't they? I mean, it's a different universe. I mean, Rick Rubin and you that breakup of a friendship is not something that happens with normal people, right? People who are, average people that like live across the street from one another. I mean, you came from Brooklyn into a very, very odd world of Hollywood, which you don't seem to like very much. Am I wrong in saying that?
Well, I do think there is a kind of a class system. I mean, I think there's an illusion that everybody who works on hit shows makes a lot of money. And it's not like I've always made a very good living, but I've always been a worker. I've always been a laborer. I've never really been an owner. and the owners of Seinfeld, or the owners of Borat, or the owners of some of the other things that I've worked on, those are the people that really have made the big money. And I also have always done things not based on money, but based on a passion, or like something that I felt I needed to do. I mean, I was barely paid anything for Borat, and I wasn't really paid that much for Seinfeld. And I'm very grateful that the residuals have continued, but they dwindle also. And I go also, and this is really true, for years in between projects, or I'll pursue a project and develop it for a year or two or three, and then it might fall apart. So when you start to kind of like add up and do the division on the amount of money that I've made per hour, I'm making like basically minimum wage. I live okay. I have a little bit of money, no question about it, but it's not in the same class. And I've tried to also, just in general, stay very grounded. And I find that a lot of people, as soon as they start making a lot of money, enter that bubble, and they lose touch with reality. And I have really made it a point to stay connected to reality as much as possible.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the best way I've been able to balance it.
And just a question that I don't actually know the answer to, is it like when you see Seinfeld sold, in basically what modern version of syndication rights to Netflix or something for $1 billion, you, I presume, get a small piece of that or get something from that, right?
No, I don't get anything from that. I mean, there might be, in fact, selling it to Netflix because of the cable deals that the WGA made, and I didn't direct any of the Seinfelds. There's a little, it might be a pittance of a residual for that.
Yeah.
But I don't believe there may not even be that, So again, I'm very grateful Seinfeld has opened up so many doors for me. And a lot of the money I've made subsequently was because I worked on Seinfeld. That's the way I look at that economically, not that I make a killing every time they turn around and sell it again to Netflix. That's for Larry and Jerry and Castle Rock, the production company, and people. There are people behind the scenes who financed it. Those are the people that make that money. I don't get that money at all. No. And if you went to and I'm one of the more prominent writers, and I've had a great career, so to speak. But if you go to the writers who worked one season on Seinfeld, it's like they didn't get rich from this. They are back to like looking for a job, So there is a very have and have not kind of equation on these kind of shows. I've used have nots.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you worked on possibly the greatest, widely considered one of the greatest sitcoms in the history of sitcoms. And throughout that, you want to direct. I mean, this is something that you're a writer at the time. You want to direct. And then you get to direct with one of the greatest musicians in the history of modern music. I mean, my lights. I mean, and by the way, one thing I have to say, I was absolutely stunned by, because I've had contact with him for something I wrote, that you're the cousin of Jeff Rosen. And if people don't know, Jeff Rosen is Dylan's manager, consigliere. And when I was doing a story about Dylan, which became a kind of a bigger story, I had to get in touch with Jeff Rosen, who's impossible to get in touch with, but I found a way, and I found out that you were his cousin. But you direct Masked and Anonymous, a movie with Bob Dylan, and it is born in the weirdest possible way of Bob Dylan being obsessed with Jerry Lewis. Is that correct? Can you tell us about that?
Well, let me just back up a little bit, if I may.
Yeah.
You were talking about the economics for a second, but I'll give you a perfect example with the Bob Dylan movie. I worked with Bob for probably 3 years before we even made the movie, because we first did the comedy thing for HBO.
Yeah.
And then he decided he didn't want to do that. Then we did the movie. For all of that 3+ years, I was eventually paid for the movie only as a director $100,000. I was paid $100,000, and the producers came to me while we were shooting and said, we're out of money. You have to kick back your salary. And I actually kicked back my salary on that. So I made zero on Masked and Anonymous, to give you an example of how bad my economic knowledge is. I didn't make any money on that, but I don't regret that. But that just gives you some perspective on the true economics of show business. Bob had been on tour, as he still is, and at that time, Never Ending Tour. And his technology at that time was a VHS machine that he had in the bus. And he watched constant movies. He's a movie freak. He watches movies of all kinds, really has great knowledge of movies, often alludes to movies in his songs, in fact. And at that time, for whatever reason, he was watching Jerry Lewis movies and finding them hilarious. And he was loving Jerry Lewis movies. And I love Jerry Lewis too, by the way, at least his classic movies. And so that's when he talked to Jeff. And Jeff, he said, I want to do a comedy show, like an HBO half-hour comedy show. And so Jeff called me very gingerly, said, would you be interested? Bob wants to do a comedy show. Would you be interested in talking to him about it? And I was like, of course I'll talk to him about it. And I thought it would only be like a meeting. I would have a meeting with Bob Dylan, and then I can go back to my friends and go, hey, I met Bob Dylan. That was the extent of my expectation for that. But when I met him, and that's a kind of a long story, but we met and we almost basically started writing right off the bat. And I met him at this coffee shop that he owned on 18th Street in Santa Monica. And he's got a boxing gym in the back there. And we would sit in that boxing gym in a cubicle, and he would chain smoke all day long, like 12 hours we would go. He wouldn't offer me water or food or anything, just smoke. I had all the free smoke I wanted. And we wrote this half hour, very surreal, almost like a Buster Keaton, Louis Buñuel kind of comedy show. And when it was time to go to HBO to pitch it, we said, the producer said to me, if Bob came to the meeting, they would buy it in the room, And so I went to Bob and I said, look, if you come to the meeting, we'll sell the show right there, And he agreed. So we met in the courtyard of Century City at that time. And at that time, I was wearing pajamas all the time. Yeah. And I wore full sets of pajamas. And I'm waiting for him wearing the pajamas in the middle of this, everybody's going to work in their suits and everything. And I'm wearing these pajamas. My hair was really long and like it is in the back of the book there. And he shows up in his limo and he gets out and he's dressed like Jack Palance in The Gunslinger or something like that. He's wearing like a black cowboy hat and a black leather floor-length duster and black leather boots and stuff, all in black. And he and I go strolling into this meeting. And as we get to the door, Chris Albrecht, who's the president of HBO, is about to greet us. And he goes, Bob, I'm so excited to meet you. So excited. Look, I have the tickets of the original Woodstock on my wall here. Oh, and he's tickets. And Bob just looks at the tickets and looks at him and goes, I didn't play Woodstock. And he just strolls right past him to the big picture windows on the other side of this gigantic office and stares out the window for the entire meeting, never says a word. And I'm left pitching this show while Bob Dylan is standing at the window, not acknowledging that we even exist, So despite that, Chris still bought the show. And it would have been an interesting show, He bought the show. We went out to the elevator. By the time we got to the elevator, Jeff was there. Gavin Pallone, who was my manager at the time, was there. And we were all excited and really, really happy and clicking our heels. And we got to the elevator. And I saw that Bob had a kind of a sour expression on his face, which was not that unusual. But I was like, is something wrong? And he's like, I don't want to do it anymore. That's how far we got to the elevator before he said, I don't want to do it anymore. And I was like, what's the matter? And he's like, oh, it's too slapsticky or whatever. It's like, well, so my manager, downstairs, he said, you got to get out of this, man. You got to just like bail on this. This is crazy. And I said, I'm on the Bob Dylan train and I'm taking this to the last stop. I'm not getting off. I'm staying on the train. Even if it crashes, I'm going to stay on this train. And I went to Bob and I said, look, man, is there some way we can turn this into something else and make it into something that you would want to do? And he said, okay to that. And so we started then spending another year working on the script that became Masked and Anonymous, incorporating some of the elements from the original thing, but basically writing a brand new thing, which we eventually did. And then we're able to get a little bit of money, $4 million to make that movie with all those stars in it. So Yeah, it got made, which to me is the miracle. And I thought that would really kickstart my directing career because I'd only directed one episode of Curb at that point. And I thought, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. I'm going to be a director now. And then the movie completely bombed and destroyed my directing career for quite a few years to come after that.
I love the film, by the way, just for the record. And
Thank you.
maybe I am biased because I have to wade through the piles of Dylan bootlegs and stuff to get to the television to even put it on. So I'm a bit biased in the sense that I'm obsessed with Dylan. But the thing about what I was really not amazed by, was predictable, but I loved that you reaffirmed this, is that you read books like this and you're like, oh, this is the real person behind the, and you read about Dylan, it's like, oh, he's exactly that guy. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, just the exchange when you meet him and you order an iced coffee and he says, I want a hot drink. Like like I can imagine Dylan saying that.
Yeah.
But one more
beverage.
question, a hot beverage, and then he drinks yours. But one more question about this. I want to say on Dylan, there's so much, but you have, I mean, this insane career in which there are so few people. Jacques Levy is one that I can think of that can say, I wrote with Bob Dylan.
Right,
You know, he's a Nobel Prize winner, which is kind of absurd in a way, but one of the great songwriters of all time. But you wrote with him for like multiple years. I mean, what is that process like through the haze of cigarette smoke? I mean, is he just, you know, sending out ideas? You're giving him ideas? I mean, are you brave? I would be so timid in a situation like that to float ideas to Bob Dylan. I mean, what is that like as a writing process?
At first I was, but he's great. I mean, he's a great collaborator. He does not collaborate very much, as you pointed out. I mean, Jacques Levy, Sam Shepard wrote one song with him
That's
or something.
right, yeah,
You know?
on Empire Burlesque, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of stuff that he's collaborated on, really. So I felt very privileged in that respect. And while I would sit and be talking to him across a table, I was often saying to myself, I can't believe this.
Yeah.
I'm in a room with Bob Dylan. I'm actually writing with Bob Dylan. But the truth was the work. And he had this box this is how he started. He had a box, this beautiful box, and he opened the box and there was tons of scrap paper in it. And he dumped that out on the desk. And he said, hey, you know, I don't know what to do with all this. And I started looking at it and it was like, there'd be a name on a piece of paper, Uncle Sweetheart. Oh, well, I said, this could be a character, you know, that's the character's name. And then there'll be another piece of paper with like just a pithy aphorism, you know, of that only he could write, you know. And I go, well, this could be a line of dialogue. And he's like, you could do that? And I was like, yeah. And I realized this is how he wrote his songs also. He really employed a kind of a William Burroughs cut up technique, like a sort of, and let the meaning emerge out of this sort of these seemingly random juxtapositions, you know. And we sort of went with that. And so he'd come in some days with like a great monologue that he wrote about who knows what, you know, but then I would have to write the scene that the monologue would go in. And I had learned just from being on Seinfeld, really, and from writing parodies and sketches on Fridays, how to channel a voice, you know? And so I was able to channel Bob's voice so that I could take that monologue and put it into a context that sounded like that Bob Dylan had written it. So it was very much of a collaboration, very much a back and forth. He was very responsive to my thoughts and notes, as reticent as I was sometimes to give him, you know, to criticize or critique anything that he wrote. At a certain point, I had to do that, you know, and for the sake of the script. And he was very responsive to it. So it was a incredible experience, a creative experience, and a pure creative experience also.
I mean, if you're not there to shape it, you get Ronaldo and Clara, which if you've seen the film, I mean, there's a 4.5 hour cut of it. The live performances are incredible, but I mean, it's kind of a meandering thing. But you're
there's a 3.5. I just got, not to interrupt, excuse me, but there's a 3.5 hour cut of Master Anonymous also.
Yes.
I think I only have a copy that's on VHS. Bob and Jeff have all the original cuts and everything like that. It's theirs. But that's a very interesting movie also that you could watch on TV now and probably cut it into like 3 or 4 parts. And people would find that fascinating because it has a lot more characters, much more music. And it really was more the way it was intended initially, because it's more of a comedy really than the version that we cut down. The version that you've seen is a little bit more somber than the original version that we did, which was more of a kind of a pageant in a way.
Yeah, 1,000-page books, 3.5-hour cuts. Larry, you just hate editors, don't you?
I'm not into it.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see that. So if you can slip me a copy, I won't tell Jeff Rosen. But this is the idea from his, is that this is going to be your directorial debut. You're doing with Dylan. You got John Goodman, and I mean, this is just like it's an incredible cast. And then as you say, it's not something that the average person is going to love. It kind of flops in its way. But, I mean, in fairness, it has gained a cult following and people really, really appreciate it now. But you go on into direct, and then you do some stuff with Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is notoriously, a kind of a hard thing to direct, considering there's a rough outline of a script. You have all these comedic kind of geniuses in the room. You turn it on, Steve Coogan's there, Robert Schmeigel, all these people. But you're directing that, and that, again, is one of the great comedy shows of the past 20, 30 years. What was that like as an experience to be directing? Because you never got to do that on Seinfeld, but it's kind of Larry's show, isn't it? I mean, you're following his leads, right?
Yes. Well, that was fun. After Master Anonymous, had its fate, to go back to Curb, which is what I did, was a great cushion for me. I was able to, it was a very comfortable environment. We had fun there. There was no pressure. Larry had worked it out, unlike Seinfeld and most things, so that the schedule really favored the artistic creation. So we had time to play, and that's what that show was about. It was about playing. And if we were onto something that we really liked, we'd be able to really exploit it and take it to a really the furthest level that we could. And if we went into editing and we didn't think that we nailed it, we built into the schedule to be able to go back out and reshoot or shoot new material to buffer whatever else we had written, So it was really fun. And as you say, there were great comic minds all around, behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, between Richard Lewis and Bob Einstein and Susie Essman. So many. You okay there?
Yeah, I don't know what that was. Yeah, there's some noise. Yeah.
But so it was pure fun. There was really no, unlike most things that you do in show business, which have schedules and are somebody's breathing down your neck. This was like nobody bothering us, just us having fun, and then going into editing and shaping it into something. And the original cuts of, you're talking about 1,000 pages or 3.5 hours. The original cuts of Curb are an hour long. So we would have to cut off in half the show. And I always was like trying to lobby Larry to put out these 1-hour versions. Maybe someday they will, because they're fascinating. Also great scenes, a lot of funny stuff that just had to be cut so that it stayed in that 30-minute slot.
Well, I hate being so effusive to somebody, but it's just like, this is honestly how I feel about this stuff. Do you have a clip? I have a clip. I wanted to play a 1-minute clip from the best episode of Curb. Can we play my favorite episode, which I discovered that you directed, and I'm not going to give any lead up to this, but we can play that. Let's play this 1-minute clip, and it is one of the greatest 1-minute bits of comedy in Curb history, directed by Larry Charles. Check this out.
All right, great.
Center stage, every one of you, all give yourselves a clap on the hand. I'm so proud of every one of you. Before I came out today, I think about, I'm like the Steinbrenner. And I think, what would Steinbrenner say right now? He would say that when you put on this uniform with my name on it, there is no substitute for winning. No substitute. Or you hit the deck. So we're going to go out there. We're going to play this other team, quote unquote, Rari's clothing with their pussy mustard yellow shit uniforms. We aren't just going to beat them. We will grab them and we will fuck their sisters in the cunt. Are you listening? Bring it in, come on.
Oh, man.
Fuck these people. Fuck these people. Yes.
if there was another second on that clip, would be the great Jeff Garland walking away saying, "Fuck their sisters in the cunt. Who talks like that?" Which is in watching Robert Smigel laughing at his own Triumph the Insult comic dog now as a automotive mechanic / softball team. Like I saw a quote from Smigel where he said, you know, Larry Charles told me I have to like do this. I wrote a few things down and I went out there and did it. I mean, you're directing this and you just have this expectation from guys like Smigel of like, here's some rough outline, go do it. And that is what he produces, which I think is a mini masterpiece.
Well, I will say that I think one of the things that I brought to Curb, and I think one of the reasons Larry liked me directing the shows, was because I really pushed as hard as I could. On Borat, on Curb, even on Seinfeld, I always push as hard as I can. I want to take it as far as I possibly can. And when you find a like-minded collaborator like Bob Smigel, who like sort of really responds to that, you know, I think a lot of directors would have pulled him back, but I did the opposite. I pushed him more and more and more, and he responded so well. And that's why that is so funny, I think. You know, he goes beyond.
Yeah. I mean, having you on here is just an excuse for me to play that because I've watched it. Like about a quarter of the views on YouTube are from me. I think that's unbelievably funny. But you mentioned Borat. Let's if you have a few minutes, we'll just do a little bit on Borat. That thing is, I mean, what a classic movie that is. But you're watching that and you're gritting your teeth and you're nervous the whole time because, you know, it's just one of those situations. And particularly for somebody who's been out in the field shooting and I've had neo-Nazis tell me to leave their house and things like that. And I'm always so terrified of those situations. And I always have producers who are great and know how to do it. But your chapter on this, it might be the longest chapter in the book. It's a very, very detailed chapter. You have to have all these contingencies when you're going out there to film with Sacha Baron Cohen, who's going into people's homes and going to, you know, even the Brüno stuff and the cage match. People are braying for blood. And there's you with your long beard and your long hair in the South. I mean, were you ever sort of terrified and say, you know, this might go too far? Because there's a bit in the Brüno chapter you talk about shooting something in Israel where there were a lot of people think that, okay, this is going too far, but you did it anyway.
Yeah, I don't know why. I might have, you know, maybe I need to be diagnosed or something. But in situations like that, I don't get scared. I kind of enter a state of calm, and I'm very hyper, you know, because I want to get the scene, and I don't want anything to get in the way of the scene. But I don't get scared for my safety. I'm very protective of Sasha. I want to make sure Sasha doesn't get hurt. But for myself, I am ready to plunge in those situations. Now I'm older now. I don't know if I'm as willing to put my physical being in such danger as I have done. But at that time, it never scared me. I just wasn't worried about that. I was all about getting the scene. I knew we were onto something great, and I did not want to let go. So it kind of pushed me and pushed Sasha also to places that we might not have gone otherwise or alone. You know?
Yeah, I mean, you talk in I think in the first chapter of the book about this fear that resonated with me. I have the exact same thing. I always worry about, you know, my blood sugar going so low that I get into my coma, and I fear what the neighbors are going to think when the ambulance comes. Like you say the exact same thing. And I'm trying, and I think about this all the time. It's like, it's this crazy fear that I have. But at the same time, I mean, you have that, but also at the same time, you don't mind being in this situation where you have a stadium full of people that want to tear your head off. Like, how are those two things different?
You know, I can't really explain it. I mean, there's something about personal embarrassment is greater to me, like the going in the ambulance in front of all the neighbors, than the sacrifice that I'm willing to make to get the scene. I was very single-minded, and whatever has to be turned off in my brain to let me do that. I mean, I was in Somalia. Again, you've been obviously in a lot of these dangerous situations. When I was in Somalia or Iraq, and, you know, we were surrounded by soldiers with machine guns, in those moments, I don't freak out. I get kind of calm. It's like I surrender. I kind of surrender to the void. I can't do anything about it. I can't really stop it. I have to make sure at least we're shooting it, so we have it on film. So I walk away. I would hate to have those situations happen and for me to miss something, because there's no going back. With somebody like Sasha, they're one take scenes, If the scene in Jerusalem doesn't happen, we're not going to be able to go back to that neighborhood and shoot it again. We can't stop and go, okay, take two. There's no take two because we have to run away. And so I have to make sure that we had the scene. It was a lot of pressure, but I didn't feel the pressure till it was over. At the time, I was all about just focused on getting it and made sure everybody who I worked with, all the crew, was in that state of mind as much as possible.
I mean, there's almost no take. There's almost no take two in Sasha's career too, right? I mean, you can do Brüno and Borat. You can do a sequel. I mean, you point out that somebody in Kansas City recognized you and said, hey, Larry Charles went getting your valet. I mean, there's a point at which there's diminishing returns. I mean, he did the show for Showtime when he put on these prosthetics where it was very hard to tell it was him, but he kind of almost has to become a different type of movie star at that point, which seems to be a point that kind of contention in your relationship was the kind of punk rock vision that you have and the sort of mainstreaming of his vision, right?
Yeah, well, I think that he was more interested, which I was surprised to really discover. He was kind of interested in being a movie star, and he wanted that cushy life, and he started to, and I don't blame him in a lot of ways. I mean, he put his ass in danger constantly, and there was nobody that I admired more than Sasha. I mean, the things he did on Borat and Bruno were one of a kind, and still stand up as one of a kind type of movies for that reason, But he started to surround himself with more of an entourage. He started to hang out with more like famous celebrity type people, and again, he entered what I call the bubble, And once he entered the bubble, he lost touch with that part of him, that dangerous part of him, that punk rock part of him that wanted to break the rules and see how far he could go. He lost interest really in doing that. And, he has a right to do whatever he wants, obviously, but I think he lost that edge in doing that and hasn't really found the thing. He's a great actor. I thought he deserved the Oscar for Borat.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Who else is giving a performance like that in real life, But again, finding something that really taps into what makes him special has been a little more difficult for him.
All right, we're almost out of time here. Can we take one question from a viewer? We have somebody, right? Who do we have? Stuart, do you have a question for Larry Charles?
I have two questions, if I can. Larry, the first question is, you've had a lot of success collaborating with really enigmatic, strong individuals like Bob Dylan, Bill Maher, Larry David. What do you think it is about your personality that's made you a good foil time and time again for these specifically more prickly types? And then secondly, after 3 years of writing with Bob Dylan, what was that transition like when you finally had to start filming and you had to actually take the lead on set and direct him? How much did that relationship change between the writing period to the directing period?
Well, again, growing up in Brooklyn, I always was friends. I grew up in a very tough, rough neighborhood, and I always had friends who were difficult. Guys that you'd go down the street with and they would start a fight with somebody or things like that. And so I was trying to avoid getting my ass kicked in Brooklyn a lot. And so I knew how to talk my way out of trouble quite a bit. So I was used to difficult people and rough people. And I'm not intimidated by I'm intimidated by other kinds of people maybe, but not those kinds of people. And if I love somebody, if I love their comedy, if I love their soul, if I love their sensibility, I will roll with the punches with them. I worked with Mickey Rourke and Val Kilmer on that Bob Dylan movie. They were both notorious bad boys, but we had like a love affair. We had a great time. So I kind of am attracted, weirdly, perversely attracted to those kind of people. They sort of, I think they're kind of special in a way. And Bob is maybe the apotheosis of that kind of person, And the other question was about being on the set with Bob directing. Bob was he didn't know how to act really in the traditional sense of hitting marks and things like that. And so there was some learning curve involved. But he was other than that, he was extremely responsive to the direction, to the rules of the game of making a movie. And he was really great to work with. I had a great time working with him. It was no problem. The only thing that happened was on the last day of shooting, he all along throughout the entire movie, he was going to play All Along the Watchtower. And he told me from the very beginning that was one of the songs he wanted to play. On the last day, he was supposed to play that song. And he got up on stage with the band, started playing the song, and never started singing it, and just stopped suddenly and put the guitar down and walked out. And I ran to his trailer and I said, "Hey, what's the matter?" He said, "I don't want to play All on the Watchtower." And I was like, from the first day I met you, you said you wanted to play All on the Watchtower. Now all these people have come to watch you play this song. He's like, "Haven't I done everything you've asked in this movie? Have I once questioned you ever in this entire movie?" And I was like, he shamed me really, and I said, "No, you're right. You've done everything I've asked. The hell with it. We'll just wrap, and that's the end of it." I understand what you're saying. And he said, "All right, I'll play Knocking on Heaven's Door." And he went back out and he played Knocking on Heaven's Door instead, which was a fantastic version of it. So, that was the only time I had a conflict with him in the entire time we shot.
Thank you for the question. Larry, just something I wanted to ask you quickly, because you worked with Russell Brand, and you have some very kind words to say about him and how lyrical he was when he's playing the role of God in the film you made with Nicolas Cage. And have you considered in any way, or because it's a very political book too, there's a lot of politics that are kind of infused throughout the book. What is that like when you see somebody like Russell Brand have a complete political turn, as he has, on stage with Tucker Carlson in Arizona doing shows? Has that been an odd thing, or does that kind of seem like a natural progression to you?
Well, I know that he's somebody who has kind of had extreme shifts, and he's also a very forthcoming person. If you read his two books, which are really great, actually, very beautiful books, he's very honest about his life, and he doesn't pull any punches. I was surprised that he made that transition. I remember I was very close with him after we made the movie, when he was still doing these podcasts from Britain, and he was supporting David Miliband, and he was really into that like labor thing, and Jeremy Corbyn. And when that collapsed, we kind of lost touch a little bit, and then he reemerged in this kind of other, he became born again, and he was supporting Trump, and it was a very big change, and I can't really explain it. I mean, it was very different. He was a very different person than the person that I was close to while we were making the movie and in the aftermath of that. I don't have a great explanation for that.
I mean, as someone who says, when I ask you about, Larry David and, not being friends with him anymore, and you say, hey, like Dylan, don't look back, I move forward. And so you have a pretty straightforward view of these things. Do you find it difficult in any way, or would you find it difficult to have relationships with people that you've had positive relationships with if they had politics that were the opposite of yours? I mean, I think Rick Rubin probably has politics that are the opposite of yours. Cheryl Hines, Jerry Seinfeld even have different views. I mean, there's probably a lot of them in your life. Is it possible to maintain those relationships if you're somebody who is like motivated by politics, to kind of separate the art from the artist in a way?
It's a really good question, and I haven't really had to grapple with it all that much. I mean, I don't. If I was still doing Seinfeld, and we were in this the Middle East situation that we are, and we had these kind of diametrically opposite points of view, maybe it would be a problem. I could tell you that on Seinfeld or on Curb with Cheryl, politics really never came up. It's like when you're doing the work, politics just did not come up that much. I never thought even of Sasha being pro-Zionist, even though he was half Israeli. I never thought of him being pro-Zionist when we worked together. It wasn't an issue. So and I have friends and I have relatives who are very pro-Trump and very pro-Israel. I mean, and we have love and we laugh and we still have connections. So I like to think of myself as somebody that could interact with almost anybody in any situation. Whether eventually at some point it might come between us in a certain situation, that it's possible, but I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe I'll find out in the future.
All right. Well, I'm going to abuse my privilege for one more question from Max, a very quick one. We have Larry here. Max?
Yes, Max.
Hi, Larry. Thanks for having me on.
Hi.
Huge fan of Kurt. Massive fan. And I was just doing some Google and I found out you actually directed my favorite episode ever, which is this one. This one, if that means anything to you.
Yes, it does. Even though I can barely see you, I know what you're referring to.
Yeah. But that episode is like an odyssey, right? It takes you on twists and turns, and it goes from country to country. So much jam-packed into that. I'm interested to know, how do you cram so much into an episode like that? Because a lot of Curb episodes like that. And also, I don't know, any anecdotes you have from that episode? Because it seems like, it's just full of gold. It must be a lot of people's favorite episode.
You're asking me if there's any anecdotes from the big vagina episode? Is that the question?
That's right. But also, it was kind of two parts. How do you cram so much into an episode like that? It's like an odyssey almost.
Well, I've always been very attracted to density in comedy. Woody Allen and Bananas and Take the Money and Run, which are very important to me. Blazing Saddles. If you look at those movies, there are so many jokes going on. There's jokes in the foreground, jokes in the middle ground, jokes in the background. There's in-jokes. There's throwaway jokes. And what that does is it allows you to watch a movie like those movies, or maybe some of the stuff that I've done, and watch it more than once, like a great album. You don't listen to a great album once, you listen to it over and over, and you get different things out of it. Suddenly you hear the drum or you hear the lead guitar in a way you haven't heard it before. And I like to do that in comedy. I like it to be very, very dense. So I'm, again, in this kind of concept of pushing constantly, I'm always pushing for more and more and more layers, more levels, because I think it resonates more with an audience and will sort of stand up over time, because it's not just a single-minded joke. There's more to it. There's always things connecting in weird ways. And you want to keep the audience, you want to give the audience what they need more than what they want. And that's kind of a philosophy of mine in comedy.
There was a similar quote from Rick Rubin when he was interviewed on 60 Minutes. And I think it was Anderson Cooper who said, do you want to give the audience what they want? Or are you trying to, and he just interrupted and he said, the audience only knows what came before, which is right. It's a very simple concept, but one that is kind of profound in its way. It's like, I have to do these. I mean, Seinfeld was such a popular and innovative show because no one had seen that kind of layered comedy before. The layers of it and the resolution of three stories coming together in more of a novel-like thing. But I will say this, Larry Charles, in this book, you talk about your failures, and there's a good list. Of them. Your accomplishments are, you've lived an insane life, and you should be very proud of yourself for all of this stuff that you did that has brought me so much joy, and presumably so many of our viewers. But the book, which you should go out and buy, is Comedy Samurai, 40 Years of Blood, Guts, and Laughter. There's a ton of stuff we didn't cover, and it's in the book, so go buy it. Larry Charles, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Great to meet you. Happy to come back and do a part 2 someday. It was a lot of fun. I had a good time. Thank you.
Don't tell me that, because I'll take you up on it.
Take me up. I'm not kidding. I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. It was great. It was good, man. Great to meet you.
Thank you, Larry. Good to meet you, too. And all right, well, we will see you again on, what is today, Thursday? We'll be back on Tuesday, 7 o'clock. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Go over to the YouTube channel and subscribe. You see it down there, Moynihan Report. And click like and all that stuff. And we will be back next week with some amazing guests. We have some good ones, right? I think. Is that right? I hope so. So next Tuesday. We'll see you then.